Betty B. The Steam House, by Jules Verne. Translated by Agnes D. Kingston. Chapter 13. Behemoth. At this tremendous report, Lady Monroe fell fainting into the arms of her husband. Without losing a moment, the colonel darted across the esplanade, Gumi, after giving his quietus to the astounded guard, following. Scarcely had they passed through the postern before the esplanade was covered with the suddenly awakened men. A moment's hesitation ensued, which was favorable to the fugitives. Nana Sahib rarely passed the night in the fortress, and the evening before, after binding Colonel Monroe to the cannon's mouth, he had gone to meet some chiefs whom he did not dare to visit in open day. But this was the hour at which he usually returned, and he would not be long in appearing. Kalagani, Nasim, Hindus, and Dacoits, more than 100 men in all, would instantly have set off in pursuit of the prisoner. One thing alone delayed them. They were perfectly ignorant of what had occurred, and the dead body of the native who had been entrusted with the charge of the colonel completely mystified them. Their natural thought was that in all probability, by some strange mischance, the gun had gone off before the hour fixed, and that now the body of the prisoner was blown to pieces. The fury of Kalagani and the others vented itself in a storm of oaths and abuse. Had Nana Sahib and the rest been after all deprived of the pleasure of witnessing the last moments of Colonel Monroe? The nabob was at no great distance. He must have heard the report, and be even now returning in all haste to the fortress. What reply could they make when he required at their hands the prisoner whom he had left in their charge? This hesitation and delay, slight as it was, gave the fugitives time to get some little distance before being perceived. Sir Edward and Gumi, full of hope after their miraculous deliverance, rapidly descended the winding path, the strong arms of the colonel scarcely feeling their burden. His faithful servant kept close at his side, ready to defend or assist him. 5 minutes after leaving the postern, they were halfway between the plateau and the valley. But day was breaking, and already a glimmering light penetrated to the bottom of the narrow gorge. A yell burst from the heights above them. As he leant over the parapet, Kalagani had caught sight of 2 fugitives. One of them must be the prisoner of the Nana. "Monroe! There is Monroe!" shouted Kalagani, mad with rage. And with a bound he was through the postern and in hot pursuit, followed by all his band. "We are seen," said the colonel, increasing his speed. "I will stop the first," said Gumi. "They will kill me, but it may give you time to reach the high road." "They shall either kill us both, or we will escape together," responded Monroe. The part of the way now reached was less rough, and they could therefore proceed faster. 40 feet farther, and they would be in the Rapport road leading to the highway. But though flight would be easier, so also would be the pursuit. To seek concealment was useless. Both would have been discovered immediately. The only chance of ultimate escape was to reach the open country. Colonel Monroe's resolve was taken. He would not again fall alive into the hands of Nana Sahib. Rather than leave her, who had just been restored to him, in the power of the nabob, he would plunge Gumi's dagger into her heart and then himself die by the same weapon. "Courage, master," said Gumi, ready, if need were, to shield the colonel with his own body. "In 5 minutes we shall be on the Jubalpur road." "God grant that we may find help there," murmured the colonel. The shouts of the natives were becoming more and more distinct. On hurried the fugitives. They were at the road. They turned the corner. To their horror there, close to them, were 2 men, rapidly advancing from the opposite direction. It was now light enough to distinguish faces clearly, and 2 names, uttered like a cry of hatred, burst forth at the same moment. "Monroe! Nana Sahib!" On hearing the report of the cannon, the nabob had hastened with all speed towards the fortress. He could not understand why his orders should have been executed before the hour he had named. A Hindu accompanied him, but before this man had time to make even a sign, he fell at Gumi's feet, stabbed with the same knife which had severed the colonel's bonds. "Help, here!" cried the Nana to the men who were dashing down the path. "Yes, here!" returned Gumi, and like a lightning flash he was upon the nabob. His intention was, if he failed in killing him at the first blow, at least to struggle with him, so as to give Colonel Munro time to reach the highroad. But the knife was struck from his grasp and fell to the ground. Furious at being disarmed, Gumi seized his adversary round the body, and lifting him in his powerful arms, actually carried him off, determining to spring with him over the nearest precipice into the abyss beneath. In the meanwhile, Kalagani and his companions were rapidly approaching. In another minute they would be upon them, and then what hope of escape could there be? "Another effort," repeated Gumi. "I can keep them at bay for a few minutes by using their nabob as a shield. Fly, master, fly without me." The pursuers were close behind. In a half-strangled voice the nabob called on Kalagani. Suddenly, not 20 paces from them, other cries arose. "Munro! Munro!" There on the Ripoll road was Banks. With him Captain Hood, Mauclair, Sergeant McNeill, Fox, Perizard, and a little way behind them, on the high road, vomiting forth torrents of steam, Behemoth, in charge of Storr and Caluth. After the destruction of the last car composing Steamhouse, the engineer and his companions had no alternative but to use as a vehicle the elephant, which the Dacoit had been unable to destroy. Perched on Behemoth, they soon left Lake Pretoria and advanced along the Jubbulpore road. But just as they were passing the turning which led to the fortress, the tremendous report bursting over their heads caused them to halt. Some presentiment, instinct, call it what you will, made them spring to the ground and hurry at full speed up the steep road. What they hoped or expected they could not have told. A sudden turn brought them all at once in full view of the colonel, whose first cry was, "Save Lady Munro!" "And keep fast hold of the true Nana Sahib," gasped Gumi, who with a last furious effort had thrown the half-suffocated man to the ground. Captain Hood, McNeill, and Fox quickly seized and made him prisoner, and without asking any other explanation, the whole party hastened back to Behemoth. By order of the colonel, who wished to give him up to English justice, Nana Sahib was bound to the elephant's neck. Lady Munro was placed in the howdah, her husband by her side. She was gradually recovering from her faint, and he anxiously watched for the least gleam of reason. All were soon on the elephant's back. "At full speed!" cried Banks. It was time. Already the foremost natives were but 100 yards distant. All would be well if Behemoth could only reach before them the advanced post of the military cantonment of Jubbulpore, commanding the last defile of the Vindhyas. The engine was abundantly supplied with water and fuel, everything necessary to maintain pressure and keep up the utmost speed. But the road being full of sudden turns and angles, careful steering was necessary. It was not safe to rush blindly on. The natives gained visibly, and their shouts redoubled. "We shall have to defend ourselves," said McNeill. "And we will defend ourselves," returned Captain Hood, with determination. A dozen cartridges were all they had. Not a single shot must miss, for their pursuers were armed, and everything depended on their being kept at a distance. Hood and Fox, rifle in hand, posted themselves in the rear, at the back of the howdah. Gumi was forward, but still able to take good aim. McNeill was stationed near Nana Sahib, revolver in one hand and dagger in the other, ready to stab him if the Hindus seemed likely to overpower them. Caluth and Perizard supplied the furnaces. Banks and Storr drove the engines. Already the pursuit had lasted 10 minutes. 200 paces at most divided the parties. Though the natives went faster, the elephant could of course keep up his speed longer. The only tactics it was possible to employ were to keep the enemy from getting ahead. At that moment a dozen shots rang out from the pursuers. The balls whistled harmlessly over Behemoth, except one which struck the end of his trunk. "Don't fire yet. We mustn't fire till we are certain of hitting," cried Captain Hood. "Save your fire. They are too far off yet." Banks, now seeing a straight line of road before him, opened wide the regulator, and Behemoth, dashing forward, left the enemy several hundred yards behind. "Hurrah! Hurrah for old Behemoth!" shouted the captain, wild with excitement. "Ha, ha! Those scoundrels can't catch him!" But at the end of this straight bit of road lay a steep and winding pass, or defile, the last on the south side of the Vindhias, which must necessarily delay the progress of Banks and his companions. Caligani and his party, knowing this, redoubled their efforts. On went Behemoth, and now he was in the narrow road with a precipitous cliff on either side. Speed was slackened, and Banks had to steer with the greatest care. Of course the natives soon regained all the ground they had lost. Though they had no hope of saving Nana Sahib, who was at the mercy of a dagger thrust, at least they could avenge his death. Another discharge was fired, but without touching anyone on Behemoth's back. "This is getting serious," said the captain, leveling his gun. "Attention!" He and Gumi fired simultaneously. Two of the foremost natives were struck full in the chest and fell. "Two less," said Gumi, reloading his weapon. "2 out of 100, returned Hood. "That is not nearly enough. We must make them pay more dearly than that." And 3 more natives fell dead. It was impossible to go fast along this winding defile, and besides, as it narrowed, the way became steeper. However, another half-mile, and the last slope of the Vindhias would be crossed, and Behemoth would find himself not 100 yards from an outpost almost in sight of Jubbulpore. These natives were not the sort of men to be terrified at the fire directed against them. They counted their lives as nothing when the duty of saving or avenging Nana Sahib was in question. 10, 20 of them might fall, but 80 would still remain to rush on Behemoth, the moving citadel, and attack with murderous intent the little party it contained. Caligani was well aware of the fact that Captain Hood and his friends had but a few cartridges left, and that consequently their guns would soon be but useless weapons in their hands. Half of their ammunition was indeed already gone. However, 4 more shots were fired, and 4 more Hindus fell. Hood and Fox had now but a bullet apiece. At that moment Caligani, who had till now been very cautious, sprang forward nearer than was prudent. "Ha! That's you, is it? I'll have you now," remarked the captain, taking aim with the greatest coolness. The shot struck the traitor in the very middle of the forehead. His hands clutched wildly at the air, he made one bound, and fell dead on the spot. Suddenly the end of the pass appeared before them. Behemoth made one last effort. Once more Fox's rifle rang out, and 1 more native sank to the ground. The natives, perceiving immediately that the firing had ceased, pressed forward to the assault. "Jump off!" cried Banks. Under the circumstances it was indeed best to abandon Behemoth and hasten on foot to the outpost. Colonel Munro, his wife in his arms, stepped down. Hood, Mauclair, the sergeant, and the rest speedily leapt off. Banks alone remained in the howdah. "And that villain!" cried Captain Hood, pointing to Nana Sahib, who was still bound to the elephant's neck. "Leave him to me, Captain," returned Banks in a significant tone. Then, giving a last turn to the regulator, he also descended. All hurried as fast as they could along the road, daggers in their hands, prepared to sell their lives dearly. Behemoth, left to himself, continued to move, but having no one to guide him, soon ran against the cliff, and there abruptly stopped, entirely barring the road. On came the natives. With a rush they were upon him, eager to liberate the Nana. Suddenly a tremendous roar, like a most frightful crash of thunder, rent the air. Before leaving the howdah, Banks had heavily charged the valves of the engine. The vapor reached extreme tension, and when Behemoth ran against the cliff, finding no way of escape through the cylinders, it burst the boiler, the fragments flying far and wide. "Poor Behemoth!" cried Captain Hood. "He has died to save us." Section 29.